In the first session, our speakers were Rachana Mudraboina, Kiran Nayak, Vaijayanti Vasanta Mogili, who have generously shared their expertise, insights, and experiences and inspired us to strive for positive change in our society. This is the second day of our lecture workshop series session where academia meets innovation in hybrid mode setting.
We are thrilled to have esteemed speakers Dr. Usha Raman and Dr. S. Upendran grace our virtual and physical podiums today. Under the visionary leadership of organizer Dr. Srideepa, we embark on a journey of knowledge, exchange, exploration, and collaboration. Let's embrace the convergence of ideas and expertise as we delve deeper into the realms of learning and discovery. Enjoy the session.
The whole idea of putting together this lecture series is to ensure that we have equality and equity to the best possible extent, and this has been our trial, our attempt to make this possible. And in this lecture/workshop series, we are going to have a couple of more sessions which would be enjoyable, and all of them would focus on equality and equity and how do we ensure this in terms of exploring language and media. So over to Urja for introducing the first speaker, Dr. Usha Raman.
It is with great pleasure and anticipation that we welcome Dr. Usha Raman to the stage today. She is a distinguished figure in the field of communication, currently serving as the professor and head of Department of Communication at the prestigious Sarojini Naidu School of Arts and Communication, University of Hyderabad. Dr. Usha Raman's journey in academia has been rich and multifaceted. She earned her master's degree in journalism and went on to complete her PhD in mass communication from University of Georgia, USA in 1997. Prior to her transition in academia, she accrued nearly 2 decades of invaluable experience as a freelance journalist and health communications practitioner. Her professional portfolio also includes a notable stint as the Associate Director of Communications at the L.V. Prasad Eye Institute. Driven by her passion for teaching and research, Dr. Usha Raman ma'am has cultivated a diverse array of interests within the realm of communication. Her teaching portfolio encompasses a wide range of subjects, including news reporting, feature writing, specialized writing in science and technology, environment and health, feminist media studies, and science, health, communication, and social impact of digital media. Dr. Raman's scholarly contributions extend beyond the classroom, with an impressive publication record comprising of 9 journal articles, 2 book chapters, 3 notes, and an editorial, and many more. Her dedication to advancing the field of communication has been recognized on the international stage. In 2013, ma'am was honored with the International Research Collaboration Award from the University of Sydney, Australia, followed by the prestigious Fulbright Nehru Academic and Professional Excellence Award from the United States Indian Education Foundation and the Fulbright Foundation in 2016. As we prepare to engage with Dr. Usha Raman today, let us extend a warm welcome to this esteemed guest whose expertise and insights are sure to enrich our discourse. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Usha Raman to the stage.
And added to that, I would also wish to add that Professor Usha Raman is one of the most humane human beings that I have ever found in the campus. So for that, I would need a round of applause for her. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I wasn't expecting such a long introduction, but thanks anyway for that generous welcome. So just to lay the stage for the two talks that are going to happen this afternoon, I'm going to completely depress you all, talking about toxic masculinity and gender imbalances. And then you're going to think, what hope is there in this world, especially if you're a woman, and thinking there's always music, right? My talk is called Staging Aggressive Masculinity, and it comes out of work that I did with my students, two of my PhD students, and with the Network of Women in Media. And they had approached us saying, is there something we can do to study not just misogyny in the media, because there's been a lot of conversation around misogyny, around representation of women, but instead, can we look at journalistic performance itself and see if there's something we can first understand about behaviors that are like contributing to a certain toxic and hegemonic masculinity, and if we can call out these behaviors and then do something about it. So the first stage, of course, is to look at the media and try and see what it is about media practice, about norms in journalism that contribute to a certain sense of what is professional, and whether this idea of what is professional is gendered in some way. So I'm going to start with a short video, and this is a montage that was put together by the NWMI, Network of Women in Media team, when we were doing the study. So the credits are at the end, so I'm not going to repeat that. So if we can just play the video.
आ गया देखो आ गया देखो मैं कैसे छा गया अरे छा
ഒരു പുരുഷൻ എന്ന വ്യക്തിക്ക് സ്പേം പൂങ്ങാൻ, പക്ഷെ ഒരു അമ്മയാകേണ്ട പെൺകുട്ടി, ഭാവിയിൽ ഒരു കുടുംബമായിട്ട് ജീവിക്കേണ്ട ഒരു പെൺകുട്ടി, ആൺകുട്ടിയാണെങ്കിൽ പോലും അതെ, ബൈക്ക് ആക്സിഡന്റ് ഉണ്ടായാൽ സ്ലിപ്പ് ഡിസ്ക് എന്ന് പറയുന്ന കയ്യിൽ നിന്ന് ഡിസ്ക് തെറിച്ചു പോകാറുണ്ട്. ശ്രദ്ധയോടെ പെൺകുട്ടികളുടെ ജീവിതം ശ്രദ്ധയോടുകൂടി മുമ്പോട്ട് പോകണമെന്ന് வேதங்களில் പറഞ്ഞിട്ടുണ്ട്, അനുശാസിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്.
திருப்பூர் மாவட்டம் அவிநாசி காமராஜ் வீதியைச் சேர்ந்த விஜய் அங்குள்ள ஆயத்தாடை ஏற்றுமதி நிறுவனத்தில் பணியாற்றி வருகிறார். இவருக்கு பிரியா என்ற மனைவியும் 2 பெண் குழந்தைகளும் உள்ளனர்.
पाकिस्तानातील बालाकोट शहर हे दहशतवाद्यांची फॅक्टरी झाले. पुलवामा दहशतवादी हल्ल्याचा बदला म्हणून भारतीय हवाई दलानं सर्जिकल स्ट्राईक केला, पण त्यानंतर आता पुन्हा बालाकोटमध्ये दहशतवाद्यांची जमवाजमव सुरू झाली आहे.
आज दोनों लड़ रहे हैं, भैया बॉर्डर पर और मैं बॉक्सिंग रिंग में.
जो लोग नागरिकता कानून का विरोध कर रहे हैं, उनका असली चेहरा अब सामने आ रहा है.
वही पत्रकार जा सकते हैं, वही नेता जा सकते हैं जो इन्हें भड़काते हैं, जो इनके पक्ष की बात करते हैं, जो इन्हें कहते हैं कि सब पूरे सिस्टम को उखाड़ फेंको, उनको अंदर जाने दिया जाता है, बाकी किसी को नहीं, पुलिस को भी नहीं, प्रशासन को भी नहीं. इसलिए हम आपको बता सकते हैं आज कि भारत का कानून सिर्फ यहाँ तक लागू है जहाँ तक हम खड़े हुए हैं. इसके बाद न भारत का संविधान चलता है, न भारत का कानून चलता है.
भगवान गणेश जी से प्रार्थना करता हूँ, आज मैं हिंदुस्तान का एक ऐतिहासिक कार्यक्रम करने जा रहा हूँ जिस पर देश के प्रधानमंत्री, सर्वोच्च न्यायालय और देश के पूरे तंत्र का ध्यान है. मेरे पास क्या है, वो कितना गंभीर है, ये शायद आप नहीं समझ रहे हो.
Can I, as a journalist, have the leeway to break a story if there are documents that I accept?
इस देश के सामान्य मुसलमान को तालिबान से इतनी मोहब्बत क्यों है, ये सुनकर आश्चर्य हो रहा है. ये तालिबानी लड़ाके आप देख रहे हैं, आतंकी जिन्हें धमाका कर उड़ा दिया. अफगानिस्तान में कौन मर रहा है? मुसलमान.
के सवाल पे जवाब दीजिए. पक्के सच्चे मुसलमान who are being raised over a possible tampering attempt by Pakistani athlete to affect Neeraj.
Are we the only dumping ground of the world?
You can go to the next slide. Yeah. So I know there was a lot of stuff thrown in there. So when we talk about masculinist discourse, it's not just about men, right? It's about a whole package of values that seem to be associated with maleness, with and then they're conflated with things like professionalism, with assertiveness, with competence, and so on. So what I'd like to talk about in the next few minutes is basically what do we mean when we say the media is responsible for reinforcing these ideas about gender norms, and so on. So clearly there is, the news itself, what we focus on, what kinds of topics tend to be highlighted in the newsroom, what sort of stories are rewarded with front page coverage, with greater play, with headline news, those that come out in the first 10 minutes of a newscast or 5 minutes of a newscast. What sort of values do they seem to embody? So there is, in terms of news making itself, what makes news? Is there something implicitly gendered in that? And then, of course, there is the question of representation, which I'm really not going to talk about very much because I think the discourse on representation and the conversation on representation has been around for a long time. There's been a lot of conversation about how women are represented, whether those representations have changed over the years, and so on. So that is another area. But all of this, right, whether it is in terms of the stories that are told, how those stories are told, how people in those stories are represented, all of these things serve to create and reinforce stereotypes. So if we're talking about equity and if we're talking about equality, I think the first one of the foundational things we have to think about is, how do we represent the world? And therefore, how does that representation of the world make space for people in it who are different, who may have, different ways of being, of looking, etc. And then there is the question of commodification, right? So all of this is related to the market. And if certain kinds of representations sell, then obviously that's what the media as a business is going to continue to reinforce. So you may have seen in that montage 2 pictures of Ravish Kumar, which were the right, or let's say those who don't like Ravish Kumar's style of reporting, had sort of mocked him, right, by representing him as an effeminate person. So what are they doing there? In some ways, they are questioning his masculinity, and they're saying that by adopting a certain approach to journalism or a certain approach to presenting the news, he's actually not being a strong male voice. And I think all of this plays into what the market seems to want. So I remember one journalist telling us that Arnab Goswami, when he first started out in Times Now, in overnight, he changed the economics of primetime news. So from being something that was going to be based on ground reporting, it ended up becoming a war of words in the newsroom or in the studio. And what I think Rajdeep Sardesai has called the Ravana style of journalism, right? You have 10 heads on the screen. And in some ways, this is, all of this seems to represent a certain set of values that have reinforced the idea that this is what journalism should be. It's hyper-aggressive. It is in your face. It's about black and white. There's no nuance. And in some ways, these are all what we might call masculinist values. in all of this, we're imbibing constantly, unconsciously, notions of what gender is, what it looks like, what people can and cannot do as women journalists, as men journalists, and so on, and what kind of journalism is valued and so on. So journalism as an established institution, even though ideally it would like to be something, in practice, what the market and what social norms tend to force it into doing is to reinforce certain grand narratives. And this is not to say that there are no spaces in the media where this doesn't happen and where a better kind of journalism exists. Obviously, all of us know that that is not true. There is plenty of wonderful journalism out there. But the dominant variety of journalism tends to be very masculinist in its approach, reinforcing many of these gender norms. And this happens not only in the stories that are done, and I think there's a lot of work both in media studies and in other fields that looks at representation and the narratives that exist in news. There is relatively less work done on the performative aspects of news, particularly television news, right? So with print, of course, there is performance. I'm not saying that text doesn't perform. It does in a certain way. And those of you who are language students will probably understand and agree that text can also be performative. But the idea of popular performance, I think, is really reinforced in television news. So what are the kinds of ways of doing journalism, right? How is journalism organized as an industry? Are there patriarchal norms that are built into the way institutions are structured, the way promotions are done, the way hires are done, the way stories are assigned? So many years ago, decades ago, when I first applied for a journalism job, this was at the Hindu in the 80s, and I went with a friend of mine who was in the same class. And we both interviewed at the Hindu offices for one position, which was a science reporter's position. And at the time, in the early 80s, the Hindu did not have any women reporters. All the women in the Hindu were on the desk. So they said, well, we like your work, we like what you seem to offer, but, we don't hire women reporters. So I was offered a desk job, which I didn't want, and he got the reporter's job. And I'm wondering, how does the coverage of science or technology or business change if a woman is doing it? And I'm sure you see the world differently because of your socialization. And so maybe the stories you tell will also be different. The way you relate to sources will be different. So there are, of course, entrenched norms in terms of hiring, promotions, all of that in the institution of journalism. And then you have these norms that emerge. All of us talk about, you're all familiar with the image of the aggressive journalist thrusting a microphone into a source's face. And sometimes right after a really bad natural calamity, you'll have people going and saying, how do you feel? That is, now, of course, there's been a lot of critique of that kind of journalism, but even so, you see a lot of this kind of insensitivity. And in some ways, it is expected of the journalist to display a certain insensitivity in order to get the story. So many of these things become established as professional norms, and it takes courage to question those norms. First of all, to see that those norms are not fair, and then to question them. So, they become professional standards. So if you tend not to be like Arnab Goswami, then maybe there's something wrong with you. So there are, ways of doing news that become kind of entrenched. So what we wanted to look at in our study is what specific ways of being, what sort of behaviors signal what we're calling hegemonic masculinity. And of course, to be clear, there's nothing wrong. There is no negativity about masculinity itself. It is only when masculinity becomes, or certain kinds of masculinities become hegemonic, that they become like the way to show power, the way to show competence, that one has an argument with. So what kind of behaviors might signal what we're calling hegemonic gender norms in journalistic performance. And the second question was, let's say we identify these norms, call them out, and repeatedly sensitize people to them. Is there a way one can then subvert them or resist them? So that was what we wanted to do. And in the next slide, just to pull back a little bit and think about what is it about journalism as a profession that makes it kind of masculinist, right? And as I said just now, it's been something that has been gradually baked into the establishment of journalism. For a long time, journalism was seen as an exclusively male domain. Or when women were in the newsroom, they were assigned softer subjects like fashion, lifestyle, those kinds of things, rather than hardcore political news. So if you look at the history of journalism globally and also in India, you'll find that there are some standout women journalists, but they tend to be the exception. And we talk about them because they are the exceptions in fields like political reporting or war reporting. Not so true now, but 20, 30 years ago, very much true. So there's a sense that news is a male domain. And as I said, gendered news assignments. And of course, these are changing, but you notice the change because, the women who do these non-traditional beats are still relatively few. There is a gender logic in journalism, which I mentioned earlier. Certain stories are seen as not really important because they affect women more. So, my colleague Anjali teaches a course on conflict and disasters and media. And one of the things we talk about is that after the riots in Gujarat, a few decades ago, there were many stories that were simply not told because people didn't see them. And it took Kalpana Sharma and others like her to go to households in Ahmedabad to find out how curfews, how the riots affected households, how women were dealing with issues of disruption. And those stories exist, but we don't find them because women are often not assigned to these kinds of stories, or it's thought of that the women's stories are not that important. It is the other stories, where men dominate, are supposed to be more important. The other thing, becoming one of the boys, I think this exists in many professions, not just in journalism. I know that in sports, for instance, it happens in business. Increasingly we're seeing, the rise of bro culture, right, in IT firms, in other areas of business. So you might say that there is a gender logic across fields. But then I'm a media studies person, so I'm only going to be talking about journalism, but it's not exclusive to journalism. Let's just say that. So in order to become a successful journalist, often you have to take on performative aspects which are masculine, right? I mean, if you look at how dressing in the newsroom has changed over time, increasingly, and you can see that a lot, particularly in Telugu news channels, I think, where you have women dressed in suits and blazers rather than in Indian clothes. And one that is supposed to de-gender you, it's supposed to look more professional. And it is a Western norm. And in some ways, Western norms, many of them are not necessarily progressive, right? I mean, I think to be forced to adopt a masculine attire is also in some ways not feminist. So you have to become one of the boys in order to be a good journalist or to be seen as a good journalist. So... So in all these ways, hegemonic masculinity kind of becomes baked into journalism practice. There are versions of real masculinity and real professionalism. And if you unpack what it means to be a real journalist, you'll find very quickly underneath a lot of values that are essentially things that you tell boys to be, right? You're supposed to be strong. You're supposed to be insensitive. Well, you won't be called insensitive. You're supposed to be unemotional, right? So very often unemotional is hailed as a virtue. And in fact, if you practice journalism that is based on kindness, on empathy, it is seen as somehow not objective and therefore not professional. And not professional often becomes, you're not man enough to be a journalist, right? So that's what happens. So, I mean, we all know now that media can construct, produce and reproduce hegemonic anything, not just masculinity, but many ways of being. And that video actually was not just about masculinity, but also about the kind of traits that we now associate with a sort of, a strong nationalist discourse, which also then packs into it such things as Islamophobia and misogyny and, those kinds of problematic attributes. So what we wanted to do is, how does one then look at what do we mean by masculinist performance and where do we see it? How do we discern it? Have any of you heard of the Bechdel test? Yeah, some of you are nodding. So the Bechdel test is used to look at women in representations of women in cinema. And what the test does is give us a list of things to look for to see if a film has positive portrayals of women or if it's stereotypical. So does the woman, when two women talk to each other, are they always talking about a man? Do they have conversations that don't involve a man? Are there women characters who are not a foil to a male character? So there's a list of behaviors that you can look for to evaluate a film. So our effort was to see, can we then create a similar checklist to look at masculinist performance or hegemonic masculinities in news performance? And it was quite a challenge, because if you think about the news landscape of India, it's really varied, right? So there is the English language media, and then there is in every region multiple forms of language media, each of which seem to have their own grammars. So the Network of Women in Media is a nationwide organization. So we have members from across all states. So what we wanted to do is see if we could build some kind of a checklist that we could then give television stations or news organizations to see if they could, check themselves. Next. So what then is hegemonic masculinity? So we looked in the literature. It's very hard to find, a checklist that you can readily apply to journalism, particularly. So there is some work in courtroom performance. There's some work in business, but hardly anything in journalism, particularly in the Indian context, that would allow us to say, okay, this is aggressive masculinity, or this is hegemonic masculinity, or this is a marker of hegemonic masculinity. So we, wanted to see what is it. So we looked at a few, we had a group of about 21 coders, and we asked them to pull out, watch the news for a week and see what kinds of behaviors struck them as being unnecessarily aggressive, unnecessarily intrusive, unnecessarily violent. I mean, all violence is unnecessary, but let's say, that seemed to be violent. So we looked at, for instance, aggression. How do you mark aggression in news? I mean, all of us can probably say, you thrust a mic in somebody's face. You point in the last clip in that video montage, you had, two anchors or two people pointing at each other and constantly interrupting each other. So that is kind of bodily aggression, right? So aggression is often masquerading as assertiveness. So does all assertion have to be aggressive? Probably not. So aggression was one characteristic, and we find that it's not just about men being aggressive. I mean, all of you who have seen, what is her name? She's escaping, Navika. Yeah. On television will agree that she's as aggressive as Arnab Goswami in the way she relates to her the people she's talking to. So both male and female anchors and news performers, let's say, news presenters, exhibit behaviors that seem to be to be about dominance, establishing authority, and refusing to engage with diverse points of view. So shutting down people who speak, interrupting, and so on. And then, of course, folded into this, there are things like misogyny and fundamentalisms of various kinds, hyper-nationalist rhetoric. Now, all of these, they're all in their own very nuanced attributes. But when you combine them with body language, with ways of talking, very often they fall into what we might call hegemonic masculinity. And obviously there is a culture that rewards this kind of performance, right? And everyone loves to hate Arnab Goswami, but still his ratings are high, and a lot of Republic lookalikes continue to be very successful. So there's something about, maybe we've even coached people to expect this kind of performance in newsrooms, right? So how do we then, begin to call out this kind of behavior? So this is what we did, and I had sent the link to the report, so all of you can take a look at it. So we looked at some 23 news channels across the country in 13 languages, including English, and we looked at a week's worth of primetime news. So news and talk shows, because nowadays, news very often doesn't have very much news in it. A lot of it is discussion. And in fact, it is in the discussion spaces that you see this kind of aggression playing out much more. Very often people on the ground are doing a good job. It's back in the studio that this aggression tends to be played out. So this is what we did. We first looked at all these news channels for a week, noted down our observations, how often do people interrupt a source, how often do they disagree violently, how often do they use body language that is aggressive, that is either pointing like this or, coming close in a sort of aggressive way, raising their voice, and so on. And then we also wanted to look at gender positive behaviors, because we wanted to also see if there are models that we could share with with the media houses that said, okay, these are behaviors that could be emulated by more anchors. So then after doing this, we presented our report to a bunch of journalists at different levels, also a few academics, and activists, people who work in alternative media like Behen Box, some of you may know, or Feminism in India, or News Minute, some of these that have consciously kind of embraced a non-masculinist or a more pro-gender-aware kind of journalism. And then we have not actually done the training and sensitization resource, but that's the next step. So the three things that we really looked at, and I know there's a lot of text on the screen, so I'm not going to read it out, but this is how we operationalize the terms aggression, dominance, and sexism. And we looked for these kinds of behaviors, and we counted, how often in a 30-minute program do these things occur. And we then collapsed them into categories of not at all, sometimes, very often, and had a scale. So it was not, I admit, not a very scientific study. So it may not stand up to standard. I mean, we didn't construct a scale in a scientific manner, but that's where what we'd like to do. But we just counted behaviors, looked at how often they occurred, and sort of have a rough ready reckoner, like how often these things occur. So what we learned are these things, and it's not just about. So hegemonic masculinity is there, no big surprise. We know it, and it exists in both visual and verbal performance. So which means that also in the staging. So if you remember the montage, the kind of when there is like she talked about the surgical strikes, right? So when you're talking about news that relates to violence or that relates to conflict, then you tend to then have a dramatic stage that reflects that conflict and heightens that sort of hyper-nationalist discourse, and not just nationalist, but it happens in other sorts of areas of conflict as well. And journalistic norms seem to require and reward this kind of performance, right? And reward in what ways? It's rewarded with public popularity and also by rising in the ranks. However, we found that compared to news, direct news shows, talk shows offered more space for masculinist performance. And one of the challenges is that even today, whether it is in terms of people who are presenting the news or in the people who are called into the studios, there is still a relative absence of women. So if you look at most panels, panel discussions, there's going to be, if there are 8 people on the screen, there may be 2 women. Sometimes there are no women. There may be 3 women. But hardly ever do you find that there are 6 women and 2 men, right? So it is difficult to change the terms of engagement when the basic inclusion of women is still a problem. And then a word about social media. Right now, we didn't really look at social media. We were looking at mainstream television. But you find a lot of reflection of this in social media. So either someone will tweet about a program and pull out a piece of it that is particularly offensive or misogynistic, and then the kind of comments that come around it tend to reinforce either positively or negatively. Of course, if depending on your filter bubble, you may see more of one or the other. So I tend to see women who will post about it in an outrage, but somebody else may tend to see men who post about it and celebrate, right? So we all live in these echo chambers. So that may happen. And social media tends to reinforce the sort of polarization of, this is good, this is bad, and what we want is more nuance. Yeah. So yeah, just a couple of things. So we did pull out social media examples that seem to reinforce not necessarily journalistic norms, but in general the broad masculinist discourse that exists. So you'll have somebody like this talking about women no longer have hips like this because they drink foreign cow's milk. I mean, really, but yeah. So you have a lot of this kind of stuff happening on social media, and it just, people laugh at it. But when you laugh at it, what you don't realize is that you're also internalizing that certain things are okay to laugh about and talk about in public in certain ways. Yeah. Next. So really what we want to do is, maybe if more and more people who consume, all of us consume media, right? And as we consume, if you either feel offended by or want to write back into something that offends you, then maybe that is the way to change. So people always say, you can just switch off the TV, right? If you don't like something, you can just switch off. Or if you're watching something on the web, you can just move away from that screen. But then all of us know that on YouTube, if you watch for 4 to 5 seconds, you're already counted as a view. So that's going to anyway increase the possibility of that site being monetized. So how do we deal with this? Do you then write into the comments? Do you, once you've noticed a URL that has this kind of toxic masculinist discourse, do you not even go there? But there are things that we need to do as consumers as well, right? So how do we first become aware of these, the way in which the media shapes our thinking and our world and our language, and then try and resist it? So I think media literacy is one way to do it, but more than that, I think we need to find ways of, as consumers, pushing back and saying this is not the kind of media we want, and we need to change the way we do things. So we try and do that in our own media classes, try to tell students that maybe there are different ways of writing, presenting, different stories that can be told, different kinds of language that can be used. So that's what we try and do. But I think even as consumers, it's important that we notice this is what the media is doing to us. And, we need to have our guardrails up. We need to develop ways of thinking about it, talking about it, so that we don't contribute to the reinforcement of stereotypes. So I will stop there. And if there are questions, do we have time for questions?
Now we are open for questions.
This is not the classroom. I know a lot of my students are there, so they're probably not going to ask any questions.
With my first question, it is indeed very depressing to note all of this. But I was kind of surprised to find that if there is no representation of women here, I think I should not even expect anything from the third gender. Because this is still at the binary stage and it has not moved beyond. So am I right in assuming that?
I mean, absolutely, right? So if the situation is bad for, cis women, then obviously it's going to be bad for all people who don't identify as male. But then again, when we say misogyny, usually we fold into misogyny all kinds of other sexism, right? Or other kinds of gender normative behaviors, or something that reinforces a certain kind of a binary gender norm, let's say. So yeah, I think there are, if you look at the conversations among women journalists, there's certainly, a lot more consciousness of inclusion. And again, I mustn't say, I don't know if there's any men's journalist group where they talk about these things. Obviously, it's only when you find yourself in a minority and you find that you do have something to resist that you form these collectives. But I, like one media outfit like Behen Box, for instance, is alternative media. It's only online, mostly on Instagram. Their stories are very nuanced, and they do consciously include non-binary points of view in their stories.
One more question that I have for you. I'm not so much of an expert over here, but every news item that appears on the television seems to be breaking news. So how many times are they going to break, and how many different kinds are they going to break? Because every news has this background of breaking news. So does this have something to do with masculinity or TRP? I'm not sure.
The sense of, again, if you think about what journalism has valued, right? Journalism has always valued the latest, the newest, the most sensational, the most so-called groundbreaking. So that's become almost second nature to particularly television journalism to use that framing of news. And you're right. Not everything is, the breaking news will continue to break for the next 2 hours. But it's almost like an unthinking grammar of television production that it's there. Maybe, I don't know if Anjali has anything to add to that, since she's worked in television.
Yeah, I'm audible, I think. Yeah, so the way out in dominant ways of working in news channels is to carve out your own niche. And those people also have a regular following, people who present sane sort of journalism and, quiet, more subdued kind of journalism, which is profound, which is insightful, but they don't have to shout. They also have a following. So I guess to be able to sort of seek that space and carve out that niche for yourself is important.
Yeah, I think this is a corruption of that original slogan. The only way to deal with bad democracy is more democracy. So the only way to deal with bad media is more media. I think not to regulate the media, not to regulate the badness out of media, but to produce more good media.
Something to ask Dr. Raman. So the thing with these studies and the examining of these norms in news channels primarily, this is primarily TV, right? I feel like it's not helping the divide. The polarization is only increasing. And the people who identify and empathize with that brand of journalism will only say that you only have to pick on this ideology and the right wing and stuff. So how do we build the bridge is what I'm thinking, because the more we just focus on that sort of performative journalism, I don't think we are really helping anything, because that's only increasing. Of course, what you said about good media, carving its own space, Behan Box, for example, or feminism in India, and a few other alternative forums on social media, they make a difference. But mainstream, I feel more and more polarization is happening.
That's true. I mean, which is why I said we're going to end on a depressing note. But I think the only way is to, we always go back to education, right? So if media become, and we're seeing already that media is shifting more and more to entertainment, and people also don't seem to want news as much, right? So maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe because when we watch entertainment, we have certain filters on, right? We kind of tell ourselves, this is not the real world, we can think about this, we're escaping into this medium, this is not the world, etc. So maybe there's something hopeful in that. So then you actually, to understand the world, then you go to these more nuanced, slow journalism outlets. So if you look at most mainstream, particularly television, they are withdrawing from real news. So maybe those other spaces it's fine. Let them all take entertainment. And, those of us who if you don't want news also, it's fine. Right? I don't quote me on that, but yeah.
Ma'am, we have a question from online audience. So the question is from Madhavi Ravi Kumar. They're saying, how do power dynamics with newsrooms influence the expression and performance of masculinity among journalists? And there is one more question, what role can feminist perspective and gender studies play in critiquing and reshaping the portrayal of masculinity in journalism?
Okay, both. The first one is relatively simple in that, of course, politics in the newsroom and power dynamics in the newsroom do make a big difference. And, in the old, so recently I remember somebody retired from the Telegraph, a senior female journalist retired from the Telegraph, and what was said of her was that she was one of those who actually reached a level of decision making and didn't change her values, right? So she still was nurturing. She was still somebody who understood, who, let's say, brought feminist values into nurturing her team, which is not what you can say of a lot of women who reach the top. And I'm not blaming them, because very often, in order to reach a certain position and in order to keep that position, you feel like you have no option than to adopt masculinist norms, right? You want to become one of the boys. But then I think this also comes from that generation, which did not have the same kind of socialization that this generation, I think, has. Because I think a lot of young people today no longer feel like they have to adopt those, there are problems with choice feminism as well. But I think those politics slowly will start getting sorted as generations that are comfortable in being women and asserting who they are with feminist values enter the newsroom. Those politics will probably be addressed. In terms of the second question, I think really we need more dialogue between the fields of practice and the fields of study. And that doesn't happen very often. So Network of Women in Media, for instance, this is one of the very rare studies where they've collaborated with an academic. We could do more with it. We could probably advocate more using it. But I think there's not enough dialogue between those who are doing journalism and those who are teaching and studying it. And that's probably one way, and not just journalism, but also fields like sociology, rural sociology, gender studies, language studies, cultural studies. Yeah. So I think we're already at the end of time. No?
I have one question. It was a very nice presentation, ma'am. Actually, ma'am, on the solution, I have some questions. Like, what, according to you, is a better option for solution that women participation, or even like the previous questioner, ma'am said that transgender and LGBTQ, all kind of involving and the equal participation in the media, by going in the mainstream, the media channels and all, or by creating a parallel kind of like bandbox you example. So this kind, what would be the better solution? Go and occupy and try to get the equal and demand the equal position according to their eligibilities, or just create a new environment, and the general public should have a new kind of view point of, because like you already said that some women who are even got on the top position, they were occupied by the masculinity kind of ideas. So what would be the better option, going into mainstream or creating some parallel system, and that is better by going directly, or by some policy making changes like from parliament or by the politics? What do you think?
You need everything. I mean, I don't think any one strategy will change the world, right? I mean, so yes, we need more people who are different, with diverse ideologies, diverse ways of being, ways of thinking in mainstream newsrooms as well. But that's been a difficult exercise, because very often, just like it happens with women, okay, there can be more women in a newsroom, but if they're expected to play by the rules of men, then it doesn't change anything. So, but then again, having more women does over time make a difference. So, I think it was somebody in the Times of India who was talking about the fact that air conditioning in newsrooms tend to always be set according to the norms of, the male physiology. And men seem to like cooler settings, AC settings, than women. So when she first joined the Times of India, she found she was freezing constantly. And then she read up about all of this and found that women actually need a higher temperature. So this is, of course, it seems like a trivial thing. But even in terms of making the environment friendly, making it a good climate, both literally and figuratively, for these people of difference to come in, can only happen when people come in and start demanding those differences. So it's the same with disability, right? I mean, we will not even realize that we don't have a disability-friendly space until somebody with a disability comes in. And it's at that point that you're pushed to change. So I think... So definitely you need more inclusion in the mainstream, no two ways about that. And that inclusion should come with an openness to changing the space to accommodate, not just accommodate, but to really make it a space that is welcoming. The second is you also need these alternative outlets, because right now the world is not perfect. So if we wait for that inclusion to happen and things to change, nothing will change. So you need... all these alternatives to exist, because sometimes those alternatives are what push the mainstream as well. The third thing about policy, policy, at least in our country, has always lagged behind need, and has always come too late, too little. Look at the reservation bill, that's just one example, the Women's Reservation Bill Act. It's come very late, and now we're going to wait another 20 years before it actually does anything for Parliament. So, so policy, I think, is necessary, but we can't hope very much for policy.
Ma'am, we'll have one more question. It's from Anika Amber. They're saying, how would you define feminine expression in journalistic practice? What are feminist ethics of news reporting?
I'm sure there's work on this. I mean, in terms of a feminist ethics, I would say is a humanist ethic. To be conscious of difference, to look at the most vulnerable person in a story and see how something has affected them, to listen more. I mean, journalism is supposed to be about listening. But if you watch the panel discussions, there's very little listening happening. So a feminist ethics of the newsroom would be based, I think, on what we would all agree are universal values. There's nothing particularly feminine about them. They are feminist. And again, I would reiterate, and I think all feminist scholars will agree, that feminism is not about being, not only about being a woman, or definitely not about being feminine. Although it also recognizes that femininity it could be, a desirable aspect, but that you don't impose it. So if somebody doesn't want to be feminine in the normative way, it's fine. So again, a feminist ethics of newsroom would be something that attends to difference, something that is based on listening, deep listening, something that is based on humility, that, a story that you tell is not the last word, and an ethic that recognizes that words can also do violence, right? So violence can happen in many ways, and one of those ways is by building pictures and images and words. Yeah.
One final request on behalf of the students over here. How do we identify or how do we distinguish between aggressiveness and assertiveness? Very often, assertiveness is what the people would want to be in, but then they end up being aggressive, or vice versa. So in the newsroom clips that you have seen and quoted, and all of us do know that there's a lot of aggression that's going on where even the anchor does not allow the other speaker to speak. They put words in the speaker's mouths very often. So for the benefit of the students, the difference between assertiveness and aggressiveness.
So assertion comes from your own space and your own sense of self, and it comes from confidence in what you know and humility in what you don't know, right? So assertion is more about, comes from within. I think aggression is directed outward, and aggression is always confrontational. It's not so much about what you know, but about ensuring that the other person is dominated. So, I mean, I don't know that that's a very clear answer, but I think assertion comes from confidence, and aggression often comes from insecurity.
Ma'am, we'll have
one more question.
One final question.
Over time.
It's a question from EFL University. So Angel Sharon is asking, media houses often try to show that they take a middle ground. For example, when we have a Rahul Kanwal, we are also given a Rajdeep Sardesai. Does it affect the audience other than making them believe that the organization does not have any political orientation?
What is a middle ground? There is now in journalism, everybody accepts that there is no real objectivity, right? So we try to mimic objectivity or perform objectivity by offering two supposedly contradictory or opposing viewpoints. And we say we're objective. But I think journalism is not about presenting objectivity, but it's about being fair. And again, I'll go back to, old journalistic aphorisms, like what journalism seeks to do is to present the best possible version of the truth, completely recognizing that there is no one version of the truth. So then things like this, okay, you have two people who perform a little differently, one who might be representing a certain political ideology and the other one who seems not to be representing an ideology, but actually, if you read closely, you can see the ideology. And they've solved the problem of objectivity. Now, I think we should be thinking more about what do we expect from journalism, not what journalism should be, but what do we expect from journalism? Sometimes we don't expect objectivity, but we want the voice of the person who is the most affected, let's say, by a government decision. Right? Now, that is not, we cannot be objective in those kinds of stories, but we have to be fair. So I think to be objective is sometimes a cop-out, and to be fair is harder journalism, but that's what we have to do. Okay. Thank you all so much for the questions and for your attention.